Okay, so I'm going to give a very brief overview of the BIOSCOPE project, just to let you know that there's a more detailed presentation available on the CyberColloids website, and I'll give you the link to that at the end of this presentation. But essentially, the project focused on the upgrade of fruit and vegetable supply chain waste into new food fibre ingredients to add texture to food. So why did we start the project? Well, CyberColloids are food texture experts, and we have a particular interest in upgrading underutilised fruit and vegetable biomass resources into new food ingredients. We realise that fruit and vegetable supply chains generate a large amount of waste at all levels, and that this waste typically becomes a financial and environmental burden to the operator, whether that be the farmer, the processor, or the distributor. However, we don't see this as waste. We see it as a valuable resource that can be upgraded into new food texture ingredients. And the project builds on previous research where we demonstrated the upgrade of carrot and potato waste from the Irish supply chain into interesting new food ingredients. But we recognise that there's much broader potential for this approach. In fact, we see that there, like within Ireland, that there could actually be a new processing activity where Irish supply chain waste is made available for upgrade, that one or maybe two strategically locations could take that biomass and upgrade it into new food fibre ingredients that could then be sold into growing Irish and global markets. But to set about realising this vision for Ireland, then we realised that we needed to scope a much wider range of biomass resources, not just carrot and potato. So we set out to do this from the pre-consumer stages of the supply chain in Ireland, so from the farmer up to the retailer, but not actually including retail or any home use. We needed to screen targeted resources for their potential upgrade, not just based on their availability, but also on their suitability for upgrade and also potential market demand. We needed to produce some new prototype ingredients that we could then evaluate and also formulate some recommendations for the Irish industry. So during the early stages of the project, we conducted an initial scoping study. And this was done by information that was gathered directly with a conversation with the industry. And we discovered that there were essentially 14 key crops in Ireland that had the potential for upgrade and for evaluation as part of this project. Now they're listed here. There's a lot more information about them in the presentation that I mentioned previously and on the website. But what did we find? Well, from these 14 key crops, a staggering amount of waste, between 300 and 360,000 tonnes of biomass was potentially available during the pre-consumer stages of the supply chain. And of this, over 200,000 tonnes of biomass was potatoes alone. Now, we found that the losses varied substantially across different crops and season, but in any one year, up to 70% of key vegetable crops and up to 25% of key fruit crops could be potentially wasted. If we look at this in a bit more detail, at the farm level, we found that up to 30% of vegetable crops and up to 15% of fruit crops were generally left on the farms, either as outgraded material or surplus to requirement. And at the processing and distribution level, higher levels of waste was potentially available, so up to 60% of vegetable crops and 50% of fruit crops through, again, more outgrading practices and also through the generation of byproducts such as peels and pulps from processing. And also at this stage in the supply chain, we have to consider imported produce because Ireland also imports substantial fruit and veg produce. And from the 14 key crops that we've studied, potentially another 40 to 60,000 tonnes of biomass could be available from those crops alone. So all in all, there is a substantial resource available for upgrade in Ireland. But why did we focus on food fibres? Well, I mentioned that CyberColloids are food texture experts, so we know that food fibres are widely used in the industry to add texture and also nutrition to food products. Many of these fibres are actually made from fruit and vegetable resources, including the byproducts and processing, such as peels and pulp. But to date, this production is mostly based in mainland Europe, and elsewhere in the world, there's no activity like this going on in Ireland, and very, very little in the UK. It's a growing global market worth 5 to 7 billion, and of this, about 35% of the market is attributed to fruit and vegetable fibres. So it's a sizable market. And these food fibres are typically sold for between 4 to 10 euros per kilo, depending on their particular properties. So we took the 14 key crops that we'd identified, and from all of those, we produced some prototype fibres. So for all 14, we essentially just dried and milled them to produce untreated fibres. And then depending on their compositional makeup, we applied some processing. So to produce water-binding fibres, we use physical processing to promote the cellulose component within the biomass. And for gelling fibres, we again applied some processing to activate the gelling potential of the pectin. Now, water binding and gelling are important properties with regard to texture ingredients, and they're very good indicators for use in a screening study such as this. We could have a look at different fibres and evaluate them for their commercial appeal. And in general, the higher the textural functionality, the higher the market value. So what did we find out? Well, in terms of the water binding capacity of these prototype fibres, we found that in all cases, physical processing could be used to improve the water binding of the fibre. However, processing is only viable if it results in a functionality that is commercially interesting. So we compared the water binding functionality of our prototype fibres with a range of fibres that are commercially available. And in the graph that you can see here, our prototype fibres are the green bars and the blue bars are commercial samples. And we've evaluated the water binding capacity of all these fibres. And you can see that most of our prototypes have good to very good functionality when compared to the commercial controls. And those on the far left of the graph, such as carrot, swede, and cauliflower, actually had particularly interesting water binding capacity. In terms of the gelling, again, we found that in most cases we could induce gelling by applying processing, but carrots, apples, strawberry, and tomato in particular had gelling functionality that was commercially interesting and comparable with products that are available in the market. You can see some examples here of gels that are made with apple on the left, carrot on the right, and then in the middle is actually a gel made with swede. And this was one of the more interesting findings from the study, because swede is available at commercially interesting levels, at least the waste products are, and also swede has very good Irish appeal. So we managed to produce fibres that had gelling capacity from swede, and you can see that they're white, which means that they could have quite broad application in a range of products. I mentioned earlier on in the presentation that potatoes represented the largest potential resource of biomass for upgrade, so it's important that we find solutions for using this biomass. Now, in our previous research, we've shown that we can make fibres, food texture fibres from potato, but they had limited potential as a standalone activity. However, potatoes also contain protein and starch. So for the BIOSCOPE project, we decided to focus on the protein component of the potato, because this fits really well with what's going on in the food industry at the moment, you know, the drive for plant-based nutrition and also the transition away from animal-derived proteins towards plant-derived proteins. We know that there's real market demand for potato protein and that it also has high value as one of the plant-derived proteins. So in a proof of concept study, we devised a very simple cold extraction process that we could use with Irish rooster potatoes. And from this, we managed to get a protein recovery of about 1.6%, which might not seem very high, but as the target was 1.5 to 2%, as is reported elsewhere, then actually from this very simple study, it was an excellent first result. So there's a lot of potential here, not only to improve the extraction process, but to improve the end products. And I think we think it's very exciting, actually, that potato protein extraction could be considered as part of a potato biorefinery concept if we also valorize the fibres, as previously shown, and find a way to upgrade the starch. So at the end of the project, what have we found out? Well, essentially, in terms of the raw materials, then Ireland generates sufficient biomass for upgrade. Potato, carrot, swede, and apple are of particular interest. However, all of the other crops could be of interest if a mixed processing facility was established. It would make sense to locate this in the key growing areas, or at least in an area where growing and processing is clustered. And 3 hubs are proposed in the Northeast, the Midlands, and the Cork area. However, we think that a separate potato facility would probably be required. In terms of the technical requirements, well, simple technology that is available in Ireland can be used to upgrade these materials, and there's real potential to add value in existing processing activity. As far as the end-use markets are concerned, well, developing new texture ingredients addresses a number of growing markets, and as I mentioned, fits really well with the current drive towards plant-based nutrition and transition away from animal-derived proteins. We know that there's scope for new, different, and better fibre ingredients, and we know that potato protein is commercially very interesting. As far as next steps, well, there still needs to be a bit of work carried out on various solutions to maximise the availability of the biomass, whether that's looking at ways to stabilise the biomass to prevent it from going off and rotting at source, or whether that's to look at waste classification to make it easier for processing byproducts to be transferred to food processing and made into food ingredients. We need to identify individuals or clusters of individuals with an interest to take this research further. All of the work has been carried out at lab scale to date, so feasibility to upscale the technology needs to be carried out, and obviously we need to develop the potato protein or biorefinery concept further. And to build market positioning, we need to evaluate the new fibre and protein ingredients in a wide range of different food applications. And whilst CyberColloids is very comfortable to tackle the latter two, it's now that we need input from industry and stakeholders to express an interest and to drive the first two of these forward. So I'd just like to thank the EPA for their financial support to enable this project. And also I'd like to thank ECOS Environmental Consultants, who were instrumental in the scoping study in the initial stages of the project. I'd like to just draw your attention to the link here on the CyberColloids website, where you can download this and a more detailed presentation and other information about the project. And if you have any questions, then please contact me, Sarah, at CyberColloids, or my colleague, Mariel. Thank you very much.